Okay, so what are we going to cover today? As I said, we've got an hour. It's going to be packed full of interesting discussion and interaction. And we're going to, I'll take you through some pieces. We'll have a group discussion along the way. And at the end or near the end, we'll give you the opportunity to also go into some smaller groups and discuss some of this stuff in depth, so that I hope that you take some really tangible actions out of the session today as well. So our objectives, we're going to think about what we mean by a high-performing team and the benefits of having one, working in one, creating one. And, you know, we're going to draw on your experience as well. If I think about it, I've probably only really worked in 2 really high-performing teams. One as a team member. Years and years ago, when I worked in travel, I was part of the leadership team, and I genuinely believe that we were really high flying. Everyone was at the top of their game, and as a team, we were hugely successful. And then once as a leader. And I've managed multiple teams, so none of this is easy. You don't always get that high performing team that you want, but definitely can make inroads towards getting there. So we're going to think about that, and I encourage you to use your own experience as well. We're going to look at what can get in the way. So sometimes the right conditions just aren't there for some reason. And actually, if we know what that looks like and we know what's getting in the way of us getting to that high performing team, we can do the work to kind of try and remove those obstacles. So that's why we look at it through that lens. And then we're going to kind of flip that on its head and think about the characteristics of a high performing team and what's really needed to be able to create that right environment. And then that's when we're going to have a discussion about the actions that we can take to kind of move us in that direction. Does that sound okay? Is that what you were expecting? Anybody got any questions before I launch into the content? Everybody happy? Yes, lots of nods. Great, good news. Okay, so let's start here. And this is the first question I'm going to pose to you as a group. What is the definition of a high-performing team? I throw that out to you. I have got a definition, but before I show you what I think, let's have a look at it from your perspectives. So please feel free to use the chat or unmute and shout out. But what's your definition of a high-performing team? Some of you will have been in one. Some of you, it may just be your thoughts about what one might look like. So I throw it out to you. What's your definition of a high-performing team?
Everyone working to their strengths at their best in.
Yeah, love that. Brilliant. Thank you.
A group of individuals that are working towards the same sort of common goal.
Yes, brilliant. Thank you. Yep, brilliant. Dave, one that surprises me. Elaborate, Dave, please.
Well, they're just better than you expect. They're just way out there, and they're very easy to run, and they run themselves.
Yeah, love it. Brilliant. And actually, yes, 100%. You start to really know you've got a high performing team when your input is becoming less and less and less, and yet they're still really, really high flying. Brilliant. Thank you, Dave. Anybody else? Aligned in target objectives. Yes, brilliant. Thank you, Janet. Anybody else? Anybody feel like they are in a high performing team right now, either at kind of your peer level or you have the team that you are leading? Yeah, Isabel. Yeah, good leadership. Josh, one with autonomy and extreme responsibility. Yeah, and we're going to cover that as well. Yeah, operating in a blameless environment. Love it, Josh. Well, thank you. Yeah, anyone feel like they're in it? You might be moving towards it. Do you feel like you've got everything covered? Is my session just going to be a tick session for you? Yep, doing that. Or anyone? Oh, there's some shakes, some laughing. I didn't see a nod yet. I can't see all though. Some of you might be secretly nodding away. Okay, so look, I think you'll probably all be to some semi-high performing team. Yes, absolutely, Janet. I think quite often there are elements of high performing teams that we are doing really well, and then there's other bits that perhaps need work. And Isabel says you're a long way to go here, so maybe slightly less ticked off for you, Isabel. And I'm hoping that what we can do today is give you food for thought, some really good ideas around the areas that perhaps really working well, that you want to keep going on and you want to, like, celebrate, right? Because actually there'll be elements that you are doing really well, but also then maybe some areas of focus, and you can think about what you can do to kind of move those forward. So that's what I'm hoping for you for today. My definition, and it's long and I apologize for that, but I really liked this because it kind of summed it up quite well. A high performance team is a group of highly skilled people working in cross-functional areas who focus on achieving a common business goal. So actually quite a lot of what you put down or shouted out covered there already. It's aligned and committed to shared values and vision and works towards a common objective. And is innovative, problem solving, right? They display a high level of communication, collaboration, they're consistent, and they deliver results. It's quite a demanding set of circumstances that we're trying to drive towards. But actually, if you have worked in a high performing team, you will know it. It feels brilliant. And it's not in any form not challenging, right? Because you're constantly improving, constantly innovating, constantly, moving the dial. So it's not an easy thing to either work in or get to, but it is absolutely something that when you're in it, you feel good, there's energy, people are all moving in the same direction, and so it can be highly rewarding as well. So why strive? Okay, you'll know this, but let me just cover it off, because I think it's sometimes quite helpful to remember why we're aiming for this, but also if you have your own measures you can put in place, you can start to see whether you're making progress. So if you think about some of the stats here, cohesive teams or high performing teams are 21% more profitable. So that's your bottom line piece. But thinking about, the end game, what's our end goal that we're trying to get to? They're 20% more productive. So you can start to measure, if you measure productivity, you'll be able to see, where that dial is moving, and you'll be able to feed that back and celebrate, but also see whether progress has been made. 97% of employees see team alignment as important to project success. So actually even employees are saying if they feel aligned and they feel like they're working in high performing teams, that drives organizational success. So sometimes it's about showing employees that they work in those types of environments and highlighting where it's working and where it's not, and giving them some responsibility and accountability of how we get there. It doesn't always have to sit on the manager or the leader's shoulders. And there are some really, I guess, tangible bottom line measures around absenteeism, turnover, employee wellness, employee engagement that are driven through high performing teams. And when people feel like they're in a team that they can really connect with, and we'll look at some of the other aspects that drive that, they're more engaged, they're going to want to come to work more often. And I know that's obvious, but actually sometimes it's worth stopping for a moment and going, what are our measures and where are we trying to get to? Are there business issues that we're trying to solve with this? So that you can start to see the tangible nature of it when it happens. Okay, so if we've talked about that, let's think about what are the things that get in the way. What gets in the way of a high performing team, or you being able to create the environment for a high performing team?
A lack of clear communication.
Yeah, definitely.
Lack of direction. What the actual common goal is between the team.
Yeah.
Conflicts.
Yeah. And when you say conflicts, between team members, between leaders and teams, all of the above?
All of the above.
Yeah. And when you say lack of direction, is that where's the lack of direction coming from?
Above
Yeah, okay.
business owner.
Yeah. And as managers or as leaders or as team leaders, do you feel you are in a position where you need to provide that direction?
Definitely.
Yeah,
Because
very
it's
much so.
your business.
Yeah, 100%. Okay. But sometimes we're in that middle piece as well, aren't we? That we don't necessarily have it given to us, and then creating direction isn't necessarily always easy. Dan has put unforeseen personal circumstances impacting work. Yes. Yeah, there's all the life elements that come in, right? And that can really disrupt a team. And also if you have a lot of change. So if you've got people leaving, people coming, whilst that can bring, new ideas, and it can re-energize teams, and it can make people think differently and all of those really good things, it can also disrupt. It can take, it can distract the team from what they were doing to get the new people up and running, or to kind of retrain people, or to manage through that change and disruption. And that quite often can happen, especially if the team is quite small, or well formed. And what I would say is, when you get to the high performing team piece, actually your work is not done, because there is always going to constantly be work to keep it there and to keep re-establishing it. So even if you feel like you're a good way there, it's well worth keeping an eye on it and keeping it alive, because any kind of change or any disruption is going to need that readjustment. And then Josh has said, losing the balance of stretching versus achievable. I think I understand what you mean, Josh. Just give me a bit more on that, please.
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Catherine. Specifically in terms of targeting, but overall direction, obviously, you always want to find that balance. I'm thinking about it because we're coming up on financial year, so target setting at the moment. But you want to have a stretch objective, but it needs to be achievable, so you don't demotivate yourself in either direction. It's not too easy and it's not too hard. Yeah, and obviously that impacts morale.
Yeah. Oh, okay, brilliant. Yes, I get it. Yes, 100%. I have seen individuals switch off immediately because they just feel like that goal is just not doable. So rather than it being motivating and pushing them forward, it has just turned them off straight away. Likewise, I've seen, especially in large organizations, actually, just those objectives just being churned out. They're not very meaningful. They're almost that tick box exercise. Not motivational, not stretching, and again, not very motivational in any form. So yes, that balance is really important. Do you involve people and make sure that they have say in their objectives and can talk about whether they're stretching or not? I've got some.
For me and for us, we do, yeah.
Yeah, okay. Some nods, some less nodding. And look, I think there's a real balance in that too, right? You want people to have involvement and have some say in their objectives and how achievable they feel they are. At the same time, you will have some employees, I guess, who either feel like they can't do it or don't want to take on more, or are really super ambitious and want to take on too much. And actually, as a manager, as a leader, trying to balance that and give them that feedback and that understanding is really important too. So brilliant. Thank you, Josh. Much appreciated. Sharon said people not wanting to work to targets is too stressful for them. Yeah, Sharon, that's that. Is it too stressful for them, and therefore they pull away? And actually, isn't it interesting? I always think stress. We talk about stress like it's an objective thing, but actually, it is. Different people deal with different levels of stress, can't they? Yeah, sorry, who was that? Sorry. Trisha. Was it Trisha?
Hello. It was Trisha joining. Morning, Trisha.
Okay, sorry. I was trying to contribute. Yeah. Sharon, if we are finding this out at interview stage. About the target setting?
Yeah, that's correct. So when we're trying to hire people and we say, to earn your bonus, you have to hit certain targets, and then really not massive at all. They're just about cost covering, really, if we're honest. And they go,
Yeah.
oh no, I can't work to targets, that's bad for my mental health, or I can't work to targets, I find it too stressful. And it's like, well, I can't pay you if you're not hitting your targets, because that's too stressful for me, actually. There we go.
I mean, there are certain people who absolutely thrive on that and almost can't work unless there is like that deadline or that objective or that real kind of push to get somewhere. But there are people who can't handle the pressure, and sometimes it's about confidence, sometimes it's about getting them in and letting them realize that actually they are very achievable. But yeah, I hear you, and actually you're right to pick that out early on, because if you are a target driven organization and you need that drive, the individuals to have that drive to get there, then to test that out early on and to not put people in that environment and that situation is it sounds very sensible to me. Brilliant. Okay, anything else getting in the way? No? Okay, let me show you this model. Has anyone heard of Lencioni's 5 dysfunctions of a team? Yes, lots of nods. Okay, brilliant. I'll just hand over to you guys then. You can talk now. So Patrick Lencioni, very famous model, very famous book, talks about the 5 dysfunctions of a team. And I'll work down. So the overall piece is that you need to have all of these elements, and we'll talk about that in a moment, to have a high performing team. But when he did the research around what teams performed and what teams didn't, and what were the drivers around the teams that really didn't perform, or the barriers that got in the way of high performance, these were the elements that were really kind of that stood out. And it was really important to understand that if any of these elements were in a team, then you probably were really not going to achieve that high performance level. And it's interesting for me, because normally we look at the positive side. We are going to, I promise. But at the moment, I just want to look at the negative side, because I think if you've got any of these that you feel is currently going on in your team, or lacking in your team, if you like, if you've got a dysfunction in the team, then you need to think about how you can remove that before you can really move towards the high performance level. So inattention to results was really about the fact that you can have teams that feel like they're high performing. I've talked to a number of teams that go, yeah, we're high performing, and actually quite often what they mean is they all get on really well, or they're nice to each other. And don't get me wrong, that's brilliant. And having a team that is completely in conflict all the time isn't going to work either. But that's not the ultimate definition of a high performing team. Yeah, you need a team that really are delivering results. And your bottom line figures and the figures we've talked about already will show that. And you need people to understand what those results are and where the value is that they're adding towards that, but really buy into that as well. And so, ultimately your measure is going to be about those results, but your people need to understand what those results are and how they contribute towards them. So keeping an eye on that piece is as important as keeping an eye on how they're all gelled, how they're communicating, and all of those pieces, because ultimately that's your measure, right? Avoidance of accountability. This one I think is really interesting, because if you've got people in your teams who don't take ownership, who don't take responsibility, who don't believe that they are responsible for the elements that they contribute, then that's going to disrupt the team. And it doesn't have to be overall, obviously, they'll only be accountable to the part they play, but it is important for them to understand that they do play a part. I come across often in teams people who talk about they as in the company or the leadership team or the other people in the team. I also come across people who kind of talk about the culture or the way it is, and the ways that we work, but actually everybody contributes towards that. And what you really need is people in your team who understand that and take real responsibility for the part that they play. And you can also, as a high performing team, have mutual accountability. So where each person understands what it is that is their responsibility, but also as a department, as a team, as a company, you have that I guess joint accountability, which goes to your piece around no blame, no throwing it over the wall, no, well, it wasn't me, I wasn't there kind of behavior. And so that piece plays a massive part in making sure that that high performing team is there. Lack of commitment is interesting, because this for me is not just about people nodding and saying, yeah, I agree, or yes, thank you very much for our objective, now I'm going to go and do what I want to do. It's very much about that piece that people genuinely are committed to doing what they've said they will do, are bought into the overall picture. If you are setting objectives, that they've had some input into that and they understand that they're really committed to it. And sometimes people will challenge or debate whether something's achievable or whether they buy into it or not, and the conflict piece ties into this. But being able to challenge, being able to talk through whether they think something's achievable or not, or whether they need some support to get there, is really important. But ultimately, once that discussion, debate, input has been had, if a decision is made or a piece or way of working is agreed, then you need the team to commit behind that. And sometimes it's worth the work to get them there, so that once they're there, they're committed and everyone will drive it forward. Fear of conflict. Healthy conflict is really good, and you need it in a high performing team. I have never ever worked or seen a high performing team that doesn't have some form of conflict. And by conflict, I don't mean, fighting, ignoring each other, sabotage, all the things that I have seen in non-high performing teams. But you do need an element of challenge. And you need people to be able to give really direct, healthy conflict, healthy feedback, and really embrace that piece that actually I'm giving you a piece of feedback, or I've noticed something and I need to tell you about it. The intention's good, it's received well, but actually it does happen. And that's quite hard to get to, because people genuinely without the trust piece, which is the next piece, struggle to deliver that feedback in a healthy and constructive way. But if you can get to that point, then actually that challenge is absolutely needed, not only to build a high performing team, but also to keep it there. Because I say it's constantly one of those things that you need to keep readdressing and renewing. And if you don't address that, whilst you may have been quite high performing, that will reduce over time, because you're not keeping relevant, you're not keeping on top of the game. People get comfortable, people stop performing at the top level, all of that stuff. And then finally, at the very base and the core of a high performing team is trust. Without trust, you are probably going to struggle to get any of the other elements through, right? Because they build it up. And trust and connection and people feeling like they can be the best that they can be, right? You want people to be able to bring their whole selves to work, be authentic. You want them to be able to be open and honest and vulnerable, tell you when they're struggling. You need people to be able to make mistakes and admit it, not only because that mitigates risk, but also because that does drive innovation, and it does drive learning, and it does drive growth. And so therefore, the team can continuously grow. If you don't have trust, then it's going to be very difficult to create that environment. I'll stop talking for a second. When I'm talking all of those through, were any of those elements standing out for you as either, yeah, we don't have that dysfunction, thank God, let's all move on, or actually that's probably one that I can recognize at the moment? Yeah, okay, Isabel, thank you. Fear of conflict. Fear of conflict is one that's that you do have. Yes, okay. Not being able to deliver feedback without feeling critical. That's very often the case in teams. And actually, I do a lot of leadership training, and often that feedback, in fact, I'm doing one this afternoon for a company around courageous and effective feedback. And really that piece about how do you deliver a piece of feedback that and we hold back and we don't do it and the problem gets bigger. And actually, if we could all build that as part of a feedback culture, then all of that, you get used to it. It wouldn't seem so critical. And I've seen teams where feedback is delivered brilliantly, and it's taken as it's intended, and it just means everybody grows so much quicker and better. So Emma has said, we recently removed some avoidance of accountability. Oh, brilliant, Emma. How did you do that?
So there was a bit of commitment in there as well. Accountability and commitment, just not really caring about the outcome of a job. So we called a competency hearing in the end because everything built up so much. And then the person in question just literally walked out, which was a silly move on his part because he should have gone through the whole process with us, but it kind of just told us that we were right to do that.
Okay, so actually the employee moved on.
Moved on.
Okay.
Yeah.
And sometimes that has to happen. I think, that piece about accountability and commitment, really, like, people need to want to be there. And sometimes they don't, and sometimes it's not the right thing for them. Isabel, was your question to Emma or to me?
To Emma. Emma.
Okay. Then she's explained it. Brilliant. Okay. Anybody else? Any of those stand out for you?
I think the absence of trust. So it's one of those when you don't trust another member of the team because of sort of past results to do certain tasks, and then you end up just doing it all yourself because you just need it to be right the first time, and then you end up carrying too much load when really the team should be working better.
Yeah. And often I hear that a lot. And managers having to pick up pieces of work. There's a balance between, sometimes that's easier in the short term, in the sense of actually just give it to me, I'll get it done. If we have the time and we do believe that the person can get there eventually, it's well worth the effort to get them there, because long term you're going to carry a lot less and you're going to be able to delegate and trust and give them the accountability, which will drive the results. But I do hear you. If someone's let you down a number of times, then actually being able to trust them is quite difficult. Trust is hard fought to win, but easily lost. And so the work around trust and connection in a team is ongoing. And I think there is a lot of work that a leader has to do around trust, because it's a two-way system. So often we're asking people to trust us, to run the business well, to bring in customers, to give feedback and all of those things. But actually we need to be role models in those situations, and show trust, show that vulnerability, be like we want them to be with us, which again isn't easy in any form. But if you can really build it, then it can really work for you. Sharon's put, yes, trust is a two-way street. 100% it's a two-way street. And I actually I trust relatively easily. I've had managers in the past who just have almost given me 80%, but just won't, just for some reason that connection hasn't worked. They haven't trusted me, which has meant that I've really struggled to kind of just get over that barrier. And actually I naturally trust people, so that was very much like, you need to give it to me for me to be able to give it to you kind of piece. Brilliant. Dave has said inattention to results is normally due to lack of positive feedback. Yes, 100%, Dave. And often positive feedback is great job, well done. But what does that do? Because that's not giving anybody any kind of real detail around what was the great job, what do you want me to carry on? And people don't necessarily know what's landing well or what's not. So giving them as much detail, as much information as you possibly can is absolutely key. 100% agree with you, Dave. And then Louise has said fear of conflict and absence of trust are closely linked. Yeah, 100%. Because if someone comes and challenges you or gives you a piece of constructive feedback, but you don't trust or respect them, is an interesting point. It's very hard to take that feedback or that, because actually, do they have an agenda? Is it about them? What's going on? What are they actually up to? All of these things go in your head. If you trust someone and you know that their intention is genuinely to help you grow or to help you with something that might be a blind spot to you, then you're going to take that feedback on board. As leaders, role modeling that, encouraging feedback. If feedback comes, doing something with it and not being defensive and saying thank you very much. I'm going to take that as, even if you're sort of questioning, wait a minute, why? That's their perception. So embracing that and thinking about what you can do with it is a great way to role model when you want to give feedback. And yeah, genuine praise is a massive motivator. It is, and we all of it. The number one driver for engagement in teams is recognition. And it doesn't have to be monetary recognition. A simple thank you, that was a brilliant piece of work, look what you did, look how you contributed to the business, all of that stuff. People love it and want it. And we know when we've received praise or recognition, the impact it can have. So yeah. Finding out what they think went well is important too, gives you a guide to see if you're on the same page. Yes, Sharon, thank you. So I would always get people's input, because their view of their work or how hard something was for them or what their aim was or whether they felt like they hit the goal is all information. The more you can draw out of people, be curious about what they've got to say, involve them in the conversation, the better. And we run a coaching for managers course as well, and this comes into that, in the sense of actually 80% of the time should be you pulling information from other people, not giving out information. But managers always say, well, I don't know if I've got enough time. That's a lot of effort and input, and I get that, because we're all time poor. I think when you're in a small business, when you're running your own business, like, there are so many competing demands on you. I think there's that piece about investment up front saves you time in the long run. If you can get a set of employees who are hugely committed and understand what the end goal is and are accountable and responsible, a lot of your work will become easier. And I know that, again, that's easier said than done, but I think that investment upfront is going to be really key. Okay, let me move on. So we're going to flip that on its head and think about the characteristics of a high performing team. Okay, so trust is the number one. And this is about psychological safety. Okay, I'm assuming that you understand the term and have come across it at least, but it's really about how do you create an environment where people do feel safe, right? They feel, and not physically safe, but mentally safe, right? They feel like they can be themselves at work. They feel like they can raise an issue if there is one. They feel like they can share their ideas and their thoughts. They feel like they can make a mistake and admit it. They feel like the team are behind them and their manager is behind them. And actually, if they have a problem, they will get some support to solve it. And that doesn't mean you have to lay down and give employees everything that they want. And it doesn't mean that, everyone will feel safe all of the time, because the personal circumstances come into this. But actually, if you can create that environment of trust and support, then you're a really good way there. Then some of the other stuff that you talked about earlier on was here. So thinking about aligned purpose and values, so being very clear about what the purpose of the team or the organization is and the values that sit behind that. Now, quite often values are just, the way we do things that are unsaid. They don't have to be formal or explicit, but actually understanding that. So, thinking about things like if you've got a really work hard ethic, yeah, and actually some of the stuff you're talking about in interviews, like testing, are you a goal driven person? Some of that might sit in that kind of alignment piece, right? Are you someone who cares? And actually we're a family feel at this organization. So if you're not someone who cares about others and is just out for yourself, then maybe this isn't the right fit. One of my values is honesty. And I once worked for an organization, I won't tell you who were basically just dishonest. I worked in HR. I spent a lot of time tidying up other people's problems or things that they'd done that weren't very nice. And at the time, I had no idea this was about values, but I came home, I was miserable every day. I just couldn't understand. And ultimately, it was because my values and the organization's values were doing this all day. And it was just eating away at me. So if you've got, that as an extreme example, it wasn't until years later that I realized what was going on. But I think if you've got people whose values aren't quite aligned, then it can show up, especially in a small organization. So just having an eye on that is really important. Having very clear goals, roles, and responsibilities is good. Now, I know that in some small organizations, people have multiple roles and multiple responsibilities. But even in large global organizations, roles change constantly. So it's worth revisiting and understanding expectations as well, right? So someone might think that their role remit is this, and you might think their role remit is slightly wider, or the other way around. But actually having the conversation and going, let's just revisit, what do we think your roles and responsibilities are? Are we aligned? Are we clear on what our goals are? Have you had input into those goals? Do we need to adjust them? All of those pieces will make sure that everyone's moving in the right direction. Someone mentioned communication earlier, really, really important, and having clear communication channels. Making sure that everybody has the right information at the right time. I would say over communication isn't a thing, as in sometimes you do have to repeat messages for people to hear them. However, I do think we can be totally overwhelmed with information, and the amount of channels that come at us can be a bit overwhelming. So really being clear about what the key messages are and where people can find the information that's really important is quite good. And just reviewing that on a regular basis can be helpful. Collaboration, working together. We're not all in it for our own gain. We understand what other people's goals are, what other people's ambitions are, what other people's preferences and personalities are, and that we work together. Measuring and celebrating success, often one that is left behind, because we move on and we go, yeah, that was great, now what's the next thing? And actually that celebration of success is massive and shouldn't be overlooked. Doesn't have to be a big deal, doesn't have to cost lots of money, but actually just stopping when someone has done something good or the team has delivered something really well and recognizing that for what it is before you move on has such an impact on a team. You know, and it sort of feeds into that piece about recognition, but recognition at that wider scale. Resilience and flexibility. Some people don't like the word resilience, and I understand, because it's been used wrongly so many times. We don't mean you just have to keep on going when we say resilience, but what we mean is a team that understands how to recharge, how to recognize when each other are, you know, feeling stressed, and what you can do about that. In your world, I imagine flexibility is even more important than in most, because you're having to adapt constantly. But a team who is super rigid or won't budge, or goes, nope, that's how we've done it, that's my job, that's what I'm going to do, isn't going to formulate a high performing team. You need that flexibility. You need people to be learning and growing and recognizing when something's not working to be high performing. Managing conflict, we've talked about. Diversity, and this is about diversity of thought. So you need different people with different perspectives, different backgrounds, different experience, different educational levels, different ideas, different experiences to be able to drive innovation. So having a mixed team is going to be really important. So if you find that you're recruiting in like the same pool all the time, that's going to drive sameness, and not going to drive diversity of thought. And when I say diversity, I also mean think about different personalities. It's not just about backgrounds and all the rest of it. It's about different approaches. Some people think very logically. And I believe some of you have done some work around this already. But, you know, actually thinking about how different people approach problems. So some people will be really creative and like think outside the box. Some people will be very structured and logical. Some people will be people orientated. Some people will be task orientated. But just knowing that and knowing where, I think some right at the beginning talked about strengths and making sure that everybody's strengths are used. This is where that piece comes in for me, but also personalities, and really use everyone in the best way that possibly can be used. And we've talked about feedback culture. Lots coming at you. We're going to, in a moment, go into some breakout groups. And I'm going to give you the opportunity to talk through one of these elements. Okay, so you're going to have to, as you breakout group, agree which one. But just pick one that either you think you're doing really well and you could share some really great ideas with your group, or one that you feel like actually you haven't really got and you want to create some ideas with your group about what you could do. And we're going to give you 15 minutes to do this, and we're going to ask you to go in and discuss the one thing that you've decided, and then try and come up with 3 very practical things that you can do to develop that area or to enhance that area. So if you were thinking about building trust, it could be that actually you do a piece on yourselves, and you come out and say, these are my objectives, this is what I'm doing, this is where I'm, you know, this is what's keeping me up at night, but this is what I'm really motivated by, which then encourages everybody else to do the same. Just one example, right? But you could pick any topic, it could be any action. So the idea is that we can share that when we're back in the big group, so that everybody has lots of things that they can take away and do. And it will also help, if you have time, to think about how will you know if it's worked. So we're talking about those measures now. Yeah, how will you know if you've built trust? How will you know if you've created diversity? How will you know if you've improved communication, for example? Does anyone need me to pull up the list, the characteristics again, so that you can pick your one? I'll do that anyway. Yeah, so pick one. If you want, you can talk about more than one, but I think 15 minutes isn't very long, so one is probably enough. Yeah. Everyone clear? Everyone know what we're asking you to do? Hopefully have a really good conversation and learn from each other. I believe Paula is setting up the breakout rooms, so she should be able to pop you in those. And it does a minute's warning and pulls you back automatically, so you don't need to worry about that. Just go and have a really great conversation. We look forward to seeing what you discuss when you come back. If you need us, we're here. Paula,
Okay, just
you.
opening them now, so you should all just end up automatically in the room.
Brilliant. Welcome back. Did you have good conversations?
Yes, very useful.
Okay, good. Right, let me just pull up this slide. So this is what you were doing. You were picking one characteristic. You were thinking about some practical things you can take away and actually do to try and grow that characteristic. And if you had time, you were thinking about how you would know it would work. So thinking about your measure of success. Before we go into the feedback, just pop into the chat the characteristic that your team picked. So one, I don't know how you're going to do this, one person from each team, pop in the characteristic. Let's see what you picked as discussion topics. Everyone's letting everyone else do it. There, okay. Okay, measure and celebrate success. Josh, brilliant. Thank you. Goals, roles, responsibilities. Oh, you typed too fast. Brilliant. Clear goals, roles and responsibilities. Feedback culture, measuring success and celebrating it. Okay, interesting. So some of the same, some different. Brilliant. So 5 groups. Fantastic. Can one person from each group very succinctly give us your highlights of things that you could do around those topics? Let's do the celebrate success 2 groups first. So one of you guys, feedback. What can you do to build on that?
Sure, I'll go. I don't know about the succinct part. You have to cut me off, Catherine. Maybe. Yeah, we had a really good discussion. It kind of started from a basis of Louise and Sharon really helped me come up with some ideas. The sort of context behind it is within our business, and what we were thinking about. There's 3 different separate sales arms, all jointly focus on the same total target, but each have their own targets, and it kind of gets brushed under the carpet if maybe one's not succeeded while the other 2 have, and vice versa. So we're talking about how we can celebrate success in other ways, whilst also ensuring we acknowledge high performance as it comes along. So we're talking through the idea of mini goals, readjusting as we go through. Typically targets are set a year in advance with a crystal ball. A mini goal is something which is actually tangible, that we know is going to be achievable, and we can really monitor it. We talked through group celebrations, so particularly when we're doing any metrics for celebrating success, even though we're identifying that one individual who's really performed well, done something outside of their comfort zone, whatever it may be, getting everyone involved in it, whether it's cake at lunch, or going out for lunch, or group journeys, or whatever it may be, in that activity, involving everyone to join in and celebrate the success rather than making it an individual experience. And then the other part which we really talked about, which I know I factored into that one, but it was considering all aspects which generate success, whether that's team providing feedback, having an alternative mechanism beyond just what we typically focus on. So those are our 3 key criteria. We didn't get onto the how will you know it has worked section yet, so sorry.
Don't worry, that was always an ambitious part of the discussion in 15 minutes. Brilliant. Just let me very quickly, few things picked up from what you said. Breaking goals down, brilliant, because that sort of means that you can celebrate the milestones as opposed to wait for that big moment. I think celebrate the effort went into my head. So, and you touched on that, the behaviors. Think about what you want to recognize. So if someone's put loads of effort in but haven't hit the target, you can still recognize and celebrate the effort, right? Because they still did what you wanted them to do in essence. But also the flip of that is think about what you reward. I often see leaders praise people for you know, working super hard, and sometimes that means they work weekends and evenings, and actually what message are you giving by what you reward? So really thinking about the impact of what you're celebrating also. And then my final one, you said involve everyone, and I think that's true, because you want people to feel part of the bigger piece, especially if you're working in any form in a hybrid world. I don't know your setups, but sometimes that's even more important. But also check in with the individual. Some people don't like public praise. So just understanding how they want to be celebrated is also going to be part of that. Fantastic. You've set us off on a brilliant feedback process, Josh. Thank you. Isabel. Or not necessarily Isabel, someone in Isabel's team, is there anything that you want to build on from what Josh has said?
Anyone from the team? We sort of shared a common theme with what Josh said, in that rather than, there was a lot of discussion around celebrating success, but as a group collectively, because sometimes when you pick out one particular employee, some others feel hard done by it because they think, well, I've just put as much in as others. So actually it can be as much of a hindrance as it is a help. So it's better to definitely celebrate success collectively, was the general theme, rather more than individually, so that you don't upset someone that you might not have recognised as much. So in Trish's example, she was saying, you know, the drivers get very recognised by customers, but someone in accounts is never going to get that review from a customer.
Yeah.
So shared success rather more than individual, so that you don't upset people.
Yeah, and having some, if you're thinking about high performing teams, thinking about the team goals and the team successes and the team celebration can also be really important. One other thing just to add on that, which I think I think it sort of is underlying in what you've said, is the piece about transparency and fairness. Because I've seen lots of organisations celebrating, but where people feel like it's been unfair, that can actually have a negative impact, and or where people aren't really clear about why that reward or that recognition is being given to people. So being really clear about, you know, why someone is being celebrated, being, you know, and basing it on fact, if you like, can be helpful, because people won't necessarily understand what that person does every day or see that. So brilliant. Thank you very much, Team Isabel and Team Josh. Right. Shall we do the clear goals, roles and responsibilities now? Because there were two of those as well, weren't there? So one of the teams that discussed those, would you like to share with us what you got from your discussion?
I think we may be only one team, because I wrote it as well as Emma. So we're both.
Okay. So that one team. Oh, brilliant. Fantastic. Can you share what you discussed, please?
Dan or Emma, do you want to do it?
I'm happy to share, and if anyone wants to add anything else in.
I'm happy for you to share, yeah.
I think we looked at roles specifically within that, and responsibilities, and I think we had a common theme that we're all kind of growing in terms of the size of our teams are growing, and we got back to the basics of actually having an organisation chart, and sitting down and bashing out job descriptions, just really taking it back to basics. But actually, perhaps as a smaller company, we hadn't quite thought we were in that realm yet, because everyone just pitches in, but we recognise that might not be the best use of everyone's time, so consequently you're not going to meet your goals if you're all sort of scrabbling around doing the same thing, and none of you doing it particularly well. We talked about making time for communication as well, in the form of regular meetings, and those meetings not necessarily having an agenda or assigning responsibilities, but just as a team catch up, just to keep that communication open. And that's something I do with my leadership team once a month, regardless of how busy we are or what we're doing. We just take an hour or so to run through things, and it's also a great container during the month. If we've got an issue bubbling up that isn't particularly urgent, we can just pop that pop that across to the monthly management meeting, and we can pick up on it then. So that helps us achieve our goals better because it frees up some time. So that's everything. I don't know if Janet or Dan want to add anything else that I might have missed.
I think I was just saying that for us, one of the things that we do every quarter is we get everyone together, freelancers and employees, and we have a kind of mini success lunch, breakfast, whatever it might be, for an hour with all of them, where we talk about where the company's results are to date, what we're bringing up in the future, what new customers, markets we have, what new products we have. So an information meeting, this kind of celebration where we make sure that everyone in the room is sort of thanked for a contribution they have made with open questions and feedback. But it's not a management meeting, because one, it's not just management team, it's everyone there, and no one goes away with actions kind of thing. It's not a delegation meeting, it's a meeting to just have those open, fluid communications between everyone. And it really helps because a lot of us are hybrid workers, and then they realise, oh, I didn't know that she was doing that project, or he's working on that, and it just helps shape it again for the next quarter.
Brilliant. One very small build on that is actually getting other people to recognize other people, so the peer-to-peer piece. I work in a really small, I mean, we have lots of associates, but actually the core team is only 10, so we're in a small, very fastly growing organization, and we do a very similar thing once a quarter, but in between we all will try and recognize each other at least once on something. So it could just be, thank you so much for jumping in on that meeting, I really valued your support the last minute, or whatever. But I think it gives you a different perspective and what different people find helpful and valuable, and it means not all the work sits on your shoulders as well. So it's just one small build. Emma's point's brilliant, thank you. I think when you're in a smallish organization or you're growing, that regular check-in can be really important. And whilst I get you wouldn't have hugely formal organizational structures and all of that piece, there's probably a middle ground, isn't there? And there's a piece about putting some structure around it, but recognizing that it's going to be in constant review, and it's going to change. But actually what it does do is give everyone the opportunity to check in on what they're doing and if it's adding value, and those picking up on things like duplication, because quite often when everybody's the jack of all trades and they're all trying to contribute and they're all doing it with the best of intentions, it can lead to doubling up or people doing things in different ways and all of that piece. So I think that's brilliant, thank you. Great. Final team, feedback culture. What did you discuss in your group?
So Pete sort of suggested it first of all, because I think for his particular organisation, it's really important to get feedback, at the end of each project, so that that they'll make improvements sort of moving forward onto future projects. With Tom, he sort of discussed that people at his organisation have worked there for a really long time, and before he did peer engage, they didn't really do appraisals. So I think off the back of peer engage, Tom implemented appraisals, but it wasn't exactly so at first. I think it seemed like people were a bit abrasive to the idea, would you say, Tom? Because because they thought that it was going to be sort of like bad news rather than sort of constructive feedback about improvements that they can make at the company as well. And then my sort of side of things was that the way that we get feedback from our drivers, because we have a large pool of them, is different to how we get feedback from our sort of management team. So with the drivers, we do it through forms, where they can, it's more qualitative and quantitative sort of data, and it will be so we can digest it a lot easier. So we'd have feedback for individual projects like events, and then we have ongoing feedback quarterly for sort of like our long-standing contracts as well. But actually with our management team, we could probably be a bit better at, you know, getting, you know, formal feedback, because we only really do it every 6 months when we do appraisals. Whereas we're quite comfortable giving each other feedback, you know, on each other's work and stuff anecdotally. It'd probably be better to have a bit more of a regular formal process as well, just as things are moving on just to make it sort of more consistent. We didn't really get on to how we would know it has worked, but I think Pete sort of mentioned that, you know, the feedback would improve future projects. So I suppose you can measure it off the changes that were made off the feedback from previous project and if it got better. And then I suppose, yeah, the positive changes that are made off the back of, you know, that feedback, if any changes. I mean, you can collect feedback, but if you don't do anything with it, it's kind of pointless. Yeah, so I don't know if anyone's got anything else to weigh in there, Tom or Pete.
Looks like not.
No.
Because you did a brilliant job and summarised it fantastically. Yes, one of the best ways to measure whether feedback is actually a feedback culture is working is to ask the question and ask for feedback on your feedback. But also those things of if it's about reviewing projects, if it's about you know, getting feedback from other people, then taking action on the back of it. You know, and we see that a lot where you ask the question, people give you input, nothing happens, then next time it's going to be a whole lot harder to get that feedback out of anybody because they feel like it's a waste of time. Which sounds obvious, but even a few actions on the back of feedback can work. Brilliant way to get buy-in to reviews if you're implementing more structured systems is to be really clear that it's a two-way process, and it's as much about finding out how people are feeling and what they need and what development they want and what support they want and where they're trying to get to, as much as it is about, are they performing, you know, what would you like to see them doing differently, what do you love about what they're doing, and all of that stuff. So actually, if you can make it a two-way process, which feedback should be in all situations, that's going to get more buy-in. And also, just one other tiny thing on feedback is, don't forget the how. So often we talk about the what. So, you know, and because it's more tangible, right? It's more measurable, it's task focused, those types of things, but also the how. So thinking about, you know, did you achieve your target? Great, but how did you get there? And there are some behaviors that you might want to perpetuate in the business that actually, you know, I worked for a travel company that did like lots of sales teams, and actually we ended up praising the ones that hit their high targets, but what they were also doing was burning customers. So then we started to change how we recognize people, and we recognize much more around the how. So customer retention, and we talked about, you know, customer ratings, just as much as we talked about whether you hit your results, and it changed the behavior. So, you know, thinking about that can also help when you're thinking about feedback. And Sean, you've got your hand up.
Oh, I just thought it's quite helpful to add, because Tom and Pete both raised it, is that the challenges with acting on feedback as well. So I think sometimes they found in the feedback that they've received that there's no sort of low-hanging fruit to, you know,
yeah,
to you know, to sort of act on that feedback. So that can be a challenge in itself, I suppose, if people want something that is unrealistic changes in the organisation.
Yeah, I hear you. But that some of that is about managing expectations. So actually, that transparency piece, the trust piece, comes in massively here. I can't give you that, but what I can give you is this, or that is something that we're working on, but we're genuinely years away from that. So here's how we're breaking down, how we're going to move towards that, or here's the part you can play in getting us closer. All of those things show that you've acknowledged whatever it was that feedback was on. It shows that you care and that you're trying, but it's also managing expectations as it's not going to happen, or it's not going to happen overnight. So there is sometimes a piece about the communication, the transparency that sits within that. You don't necessarily have to do everything that the feedback's suggesting. And sometimes you might disagree with it, right? And that, I think, is also okay, as long as it's done in a respectful, kind of honest, transparent way. I'm conscious of time. We started a bit late, but we're definitely end of our time. So I'm not going to ask you to tell me what this is, but I give you a moment just to think about, of all the things we've discussed and all the theory I gave you, but also the discussions you've had. Try and pick at least one action you will take away and actually do, because whilst it's brilliant that you've got the time to think and discuss here today, if you can take one thing and actually put it in place, then you've taken something very tangible and done something with it. So I encourage you to think of one thing. And that's it. That's our time today. I appreciate it massively having me. I'm stand now between your break, so I will just say thank you very much. You know who I am and where I am. I think the slides are going to be shared. If you've got questions, you want to reach out, then please do. I'm really happy to pick something up separately if you've got a question on something I've said. And I hope to see you again at some point soon.